Hello, 1 2 1 2.
Hey, what's up? You're here.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep,
Oh, great.
we're
Yeah.
live. We're live.
All right.
Right.
Glad to have you guys back. It's been a while. Feels like forever.
Yeah, it's good to come here again as well. I mean, we recently had the
Well,
stream
you and I,
together,
yeah.
but
You and I
yeah.
did. That's right.
hmm
All right.
Yeah, yeah. It's been a while for me. I've been more working on the French side of things, but I'm still in touch with everybody, and yeah, we've got some projects. Yeah, so everything's doing great.
Cool. Do you want to go ahead and get started, or do you want to go into some of those projects, tell us what you're up to, or just get into it?
Oh, and on the French side, we've been working with some local monasteries, uh, doing some crowdfunding. We've made actually the first ever icon of some local saints. So yeah, beautiful in Byzantine style and
Oh,
all.
cool.
Uh, we also started a YouTube channel, and it for now we're just making like mega reviews of some church fathers. So we've got 5 hour documentary on Irenaeus of Lyons. We've got probably it's gonna be more than 10 hours on Clement of Rome. So he's just studying everything, historical context. It's studying linguistics, um, theology proper, everything. So
Is that only in French, or is it going to be both English and French?
it's in French, but the translator tool is getting better by the day. So
Okay.
that's a question we're asking ourselves. Should we do a English production? But for now, it's going to be in French. But over time, resources are going to get translated, whether by yourselves or automatically.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, remind me afterwards, and I'll put the link to that channel in here. um,
Sure.
All right, so today David and Snek are joining me because, as some of you may or may not know, the Vatican has recently approved of yet another Chieti style document. It's known as the Alexandria document, and so we're gonna kind of talk about both of those. And once again, we see a lot of admissions, and in my understanding, my assessment is that post Vatican II, we had a lot of attempts at reconciling tensions, I think, between the theology of Vatican I and the theology of Vatican II. And this, in part, led to a lot of looking at Eastern theology. People like von Balthasar and other Roman Catholic theologians felt that they could, in some way, give breath and life back to the Eastern, quote, lung of the church. However, this proved to be, in my view, really difficult and as I said, in a lot of tension with what the documents of Vatican I actually say. And so we have these meetings and these documents produced by these committees, which are papally approved. That's another key point that I think Snek's probably going to get to. I'm just sort of setting the stage, and I'll let you guys make your points however you want. I've got a bunch of screenshots and things that I saw in these documents that I can pull up here when we're ready to get to them. But I think that, again, both of these documents are tremendous in their admissions, and it's not just because of von Balthasar. There's also, Dvornik, who wrote the Phocian Schism. This was one of the first key texts on sort of admitting and granting a lot of concessions to the East. Yves Congar's 900 Years Together, After 900 Years, right? These are texts that made so many concessions that, a lot of Roman Catholics will be like, well, look, you guys are getting all your points made, so why don't you just go ahead and join us? Well, the problem is not, are you conceding our points? And the problem is that this is a system that has already dogmatized a certain view such that these admissions are admitting that the Vatican I position is not correct. That's the key issue here. And so whoever wants to, you guys go ahead and take it away wherever you want to start.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go
I
ahead.
just want to make a short comment. Yeah. Um, so the point that you made about the Roman Catholic Church just saying, we're going to give you these concessions as long as you accept papal supremacy. I mean, in this very document, in the Alexandrian document, in 3.11, this document already admits that because it says that Pope Leo XIII's letter Orientalum Dignitas is basically, and Praeclara Gratuliationis in 1895, it says that it invited all the Orthodox to union with the Church of Rome on the condition that they recognize the papal primacy of jurisdiction. And what it previously said is that it recognized the strict, distinct rights of all of the Eastern churches and gave respect to Eastern traditions. So we're basically seeing here in 3.11 that the only thing here is it doesn't matter, the doctrine doesn't matter, the practices, none of these things matter. The only thing that matters, according to this document, according to the Roman Catholic Church, is as long as you lick the papal boot, all is fine, basically. And that's the viewpoint of the Roman Catholic Church. And again, before Snek moves on, I also want to make this key point that chapter 5, I think it says the quiet part out very loud. The Roman Catholic Church essentially, in some sense, thinks that it has lost some senses of what it calls synodality. And the Orthodox Church is the church that has that synodality. And so there's this attitude of, as you said, like, the Western Church and the Eastern Church being actually just one church of two lungs, and they're supposed to be reunited. From an Orthodox standpoint, this is just, we see this as an admission that the Roman Catholic Church itself is recognizing that it is a defunct church of some sorts. But we don't admit that. We actually do believe, we have primacy, we have synodality, we have both of them working in conjunction already within the Orthodox Church that is apostolic. And the Roman Catholic Church itself admits that its doctrines are not apostolic by admitting that papal primacy in its own terms is doctrinally developed. And I believe they say this in 1.5, that they admit that Roman primacy is doctrine developed. And doctrine development in the Roman Catholic system is basically them admitting that this doctrine is not apostolic, it just logically develops to its logical conclusion. That's kind of the viewpoint of the Newmanite understanding of doctrine development. So these are the things that I want to point out.
Yeah, I think this document is really interesting. So, of course, the scope of it, Rome is considering a lot, and as David said, I think the point for them is to get people to join, because they just want people to recognize the Pope in some capacity. I think that's the name of the game. But still, like, these admissions, they at least throw a lot of apologetic, Roman apologetic into the fire. Some of them it really looked like it was written by one of us guys. Like, some of the points look like, I don't know, like Ubi Petrus or ourselves could have written it, because it specifically answers arguments we are seeing all the time. The Orthodox did not have councils. The Orthodox Church did not retain a traditional position. You will see that even in the time of Peter the Great, even at the darkest time of the Church of Russia in terms of ecclesial power, they still say, well, they retained this synodality that is antique. I think we'll see that as well. At some point, they try to muddy the water a little bit. They try to, for example, do not place the Council of Constance as a display of synodality, because that would be too damning. So they're still retaining things, but as long as the Pope is safe, it's all right. So yeah, this document is going to be important, and we need to stress that this document, if it is like Chieti, it's going to be part of the magisterium at some point. Chieti was cited by the Pope. So I can already see our opponents, doing curls, just thinking and going back and forth. But ultimately, it is an official position of the church. Yeah, and I think this is a rather short read. You should probably post it right away, so people can have a look. And it's really interesting. It addresses many of the points, and I would say that outside of the part that criticizes Constance for being too secular, which is a bit weird, because this criticism can be extended to any other council before the schism, and the later part that tries to equivocate. It tries to make an equivalence between the Orthodox councils of the second millennium and the very ecumenistic statements. So that's funny, because we would say that, for example, Balaman is not a universal ecumenical binding decision, but Rome here says that it is. So that's quite funny. We're gonna cover that. But apart from that, it's a pretty well summarized history of compared ecclesiology for the second millennium. I think someone who just wants to dive into church history can easily pick up this this text.
Yeah, exactly. And first thing I noticed at the beginning, early on in the document, it says, despite, this is 1.5, at that time, despite the doctrinal development of Roman primacy, synodality was still evident. So we have, again, a kind of an admission here early on in the document that prior to the 12th century, and this will get into the period of the Gregorian reforms and all that, it notes that Roman primacy developed. So we have an admission now of what appears to be the Newman doctrine of development. But when I read Pastor Aeternus and when I read Satis Cognitum, I don't see development. I see, no, this was always from the earliest days of the church the case. In fact, that's, I think, the first few paragraphs of Leo XIII, Satis Cognitum. So how is it the case that it's always there? It was always clear in the fathers. I mean, the wording of Satis Cognitum is very, very strong. It does not leave or give any place for, quote, development. And yet we see here early on this document that, yeah, it's an admission of development. And it was the primacy of Rome, it seems to say, was kind of evolving parallel to synodality, and that both were still evident at this time period prior to the 10th and 11th century.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. Like, basically, the argument that, Matthew 16:18 equals Pope of Rome with supremacy of the church. The idea is that this is clear as day. No, like this is a dead argument now, because it requires an extra step. It requires the idea of doctrinal development, which is something else that needs to be proven. So all the arguments, Matthew 16:18 clear as day. No, you require a specific exegesis and a specific doctrine of development to prove it now. The argument that Vatican I papacy since the time of the apostle, that's done. So that's from the get-go. That's a huge admission.
And then we have another admission, which is a point that we made, which is that the selection of of bishops in Rome itself actually underwent a revolution. It says during the 12th century, the role of the Roman Synod was replaced with the consistory, meaning the cardinals. Now, I mentioned this many times because this is a revolution not just in the governance of the church as a whole, but we begin to see in the Roman church itself an alteration in how we get a bishop of Rome. And the reason that matters is that there were no cardinals. Okay, there was no cardinalate, no consistory in the first 11 centuries. And so the document is saying, yes, we get this transition to a Roman cardinal system in Rome itself, which leads to the election of the Roman bishop. Now, somebody might say, well, but that's not that big of a deal. But the prior way that bishops and metropolitans were elected was not this way. So if Rome itself can revolutionize the way that the apostolic canons, for example, talk about the metropolitan or talk about the protos. This document will talk about the protos, right? If Rome can revolutionize that, then it only makes sense that Rome could then revolutionize the way that all the bishops in the world are chosen. And so eventually it becomes the case that Rome now chooses and approves all of the bishops in the world. But this is admitting that it wasn't that way prior to that. So again, it's another revolution. And then every Roman Catholic apologist comes back and says, yeah, but see, it evolves, it develops. We need this development, this evolution, because it's a seed that grows into a tree. Okay, then it's not, like Snek said, then it's not clear as day in Matthew 16. Then it's not something that was always there that the popes could have called on, like Ibarra says. It was always there. They just didn't always have to use it. They could have, but didn't. Okay, so they chose for 7-8 centuries not to use the most obvious, effective, efficient, pragmatic, clear way to settle doctrinal disputes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and another point in regards to this is also that in 1.3 it talks about, it basically admits, and this is already admitted by the Roman Catholic Church itself, but it's nice to see them reaffirming the fact that part of what allowed for this doctrinal development to kickstart at the time is due to the forgeries and the false decretals and the donation of Constantine and things of that nature helped develop the Roman Catholic Church into becoming what it is today in some sense. And this we see a lot of Roman Catholic apologists trying to downplay these things, but the Roman Catholic Church itself admits that these played a huge role in the further developments and the controversies that surrounded it. Another point that I want to make, maybe it's kind of like a change of the subject, but in 1.8, what I found very interesting is that the Roman Catholic Church actually admits that it's schismatic, because they admit that in the Crusades they've established parallel jurisdictions contrary to the Orthodox bishoprics and the apostolic sees. They did this in various different churches, one of them being Cyprus, and they admit that Cyprus had autocephaly. Its autocephaly was recognized in the Third Ecumenical Council, right? And they're basically saying, yeah, we established these parallel jurisdictions in the 11th century after the schism with the Greek Church. Setting up parallel jurisdictions is the definition of schismatic activity. And so it's quite ironic that it's the Orthodox that are referred to as schismatic when it's really the Roman Catholic Church that established parallel jurisdictions, right?
Yeah, just to be clear, so
seeing this admission is interesting.
I'll read this point. Let me read 1.3 real quick, because like David said, it's a great admission. It reads, I've got it on the screen here. I'm trying to get it to where everything fits just right, but it says, consequently, a more judicial ecclesiology was developed. The false decretals and the false donation of Constantine, which were mistakenly supposed to be authentic, suppressed the central figure of the Pope in the stressed the central figure of the Pope in the Latin Church. The new mendicant orders in the 13th century, such as Franciscans and Dominicans, exempted from papal episcopal authority, prompted a conception of the papacy as being entrusted with pastoral care of the whole church. Now, again, this is like Snek said, this is almost like an UBI level document, like with all the admissions that it has in it.
Oh yeah, like everybody gets mad when we mention the forgeries, but that's not us here.
And by the way, I'll let you go, Snek, but so the other point is that I always like to bring up is, well, if the papacy was entrusted with this special divine charism, as Vatican I says, then how come it took so long for the papacy to recognize that these were fake and forged documents? Why were they having to back up their claims on something that, yes, later was discovered to be fraudulent and were forgeries? But I thought the charism and guidance of the Holy Spirit would have protected them from knowing that these were completely forged documents. And somebody might say, well, but they're not protected in charism for everything. It's only faith and morals. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the issue here is faith and morals, right? The governance of the church and whether it has a supreme earthly head or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point that brought up, because the question is not like whether, like today, many Roman Catholic apologists will say, well, they use this, but they didn't need to. Like, they had other better documents, but these were seen as the strongest one. And for example, they couldn't just come up with Matthew 16:18 to the Byzantines, because of course they had the same vision as us, that Peter is a Catholic, meaning a universal figure that applies to the entire episcopate. So of course they had to rely on judicial civic argument, and that's why the later part about Constance falls a little bit flat for me, and we're gonna see it a bit later. I want to go back on the idea of cardinalate. So this is really interesting, because as you said, the Roman position is that the Pope is he is a bishop but has a special charism within the episcopacy, and that the power of all of the bishops come and is legitimized by the communion with him and the approval by him. For example, today you cannot consecrate a bishop in the Roman Church without papal approval. So that's really interesting, because if God's plan was to set up this charism really clearly, why is there a possibility even for it to happen? And the cardinalate comes into that because before that, the Pope was elected just like any other patriarch, meaning by his direct suffragant synod. So
yes, great point.
You see how it works. There's some variety. Some of them cast lots, things like that. But the idea is that the cardinalate gets installed, which was rejected by the Byzantine, by the way. So you can see when Humbert Cardinal Lambert, the man who made the schism, comes to Constantinople, is received only as a deacon. He's not received as a presbyter or an episcopos or something like this, and he gets really pissed about it. It is quite funny historically. But the establishment of this cardinalate means that the Pope can pick from wherever he wants people that he likes. That's a universal solidification of power. So saying that this is not historically reflected in the structure and election of the papacy, I think that's already showing a shift, and they're quite clear about this. I would like to talk about the fact that they recognize the canon that makes Cyprus autocephalous. How many times have you heard, "Hey, autocephaly doesn't make any sense"? Autocephaly
Exactly.
means that
Yes. I bring it up all the time to Roman Catholic apologists in the last year or so, and all I hear is, that's insane. That doesn't exist. In fact, a lot of Roman Catholic apologists actually use the very existence of autocephalous churches as somehow something that makes us ridiculous and not the Catholic Church. That's how deluded these people are, not recognizing that the Council of Ephesus granted autocephaly.
Yeah, and on that point, I want to read a part of 1.8 to kind of give an idea to people what I'm referring to specifically. It says, as a result of the First Crusade, a Latin patriarch and a Latin hierarchy were established in Antioch and in Jerusalem, instead of or parallel to the Greek patriarchate. It says the same about Cyprus and various different other bishoprics. Now, this is a very crucial point because according to the Roman Catholic Church, in fact, we do have sacraments, we do have holy orders. And so from the Roman Catholic perspective, actually the Orthodox Church at Antioch, at Jerusalem, and the other patriarchates that were established by the Orthodox Church were already, actual, jurisdictions and authorities according to the perspective of the Roman Catholic Church. So even if you're a Roman Catholic, even if you believe that the Roman Catholic Church is a true church, even within this logic, the Roman Catholic Church, by definition, is doing something that is schismatic, right? Schism is setting up parallel jurisdictions and authorities to the already existing authority and jurisdiction. The Roman Catholic Church has done this historically, and it basically says, yeah, I guess we are schismatic at the end of the day. And this can be further shown, especially today, by three different patriarchs. The fact that there are three different patriarchs at Antioch within the Roman Catholic Church, when it's the Roman Catholic apologists that say, you have all of these bishops in America, and it's like, which Orthodox church? I mean, you have that issue in Antioch. You have the exact issue with the Patriarch of Antioch. You have three different bishops at Antioch. That is impossible to occur unless the Roman Catholic Church is a schismatic church.
It's almost
it's strange to see this admission.
It's almost like Snek said, not just Ubi, but were the people at this conference literally just replying to all the things that all of us have been saying for the last 5 years? It's like,
you see, they even go further. The next point talks about the Fourth Crusade. That's not even theological, but if you dare bring the Fourth Crusade, everybody gets mad because you're not a Byzantine, so you shouldn't be mad about this. But we'll see how it's significant. But yeah, all the points are covered. It's great. It's just the start. This life is going to be good.
Okay, I've got 1.8 up. Do you want to go into 1.9 with the Crusade there?
Yeah, sure. You wanna go over 1.9, or because I have some things written about 1.9 as well that are important. The main thing about the Fourth Crusade, and the usual argument that you see with this is that, what about the Latin massacre in 1185 and so on and so forth. I think a big difference between that is the Fourth Crusade was papally sanctioned. Now, people will point out, the Pope regretted, right? He condemned this event, but actually, Pope not so innocent. And Cieszewski notes this in his book in Filioque, in his documents called Reductio Graecorum. This is his Epistola 7.154. You can find this in Petrologia Latina, volume 215. He actually says that, at the end of the day, the Greeks deserved it. Right, in a very simplistic manner, he basically said, the Greeks deserved it because they're schismatics and heretics. So even though the things that he didn't endorse, the things that happened in the Fourth Crusade, eventually he used it to his own advantage. And guess what? He set up a parallel. The Roman Catholic Church set up a parallel jurisdiction in Constantinople. So they continued their schismatic activities even in the 13th century. And again, this is an important point because it's not just, they didn't just have these wrong ideas in the 11th century. No, they were continuing schismatic activities even in the 13th century. And this document is admitting that. And that's a big admission.
Yeah, so that's a great thing about the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade obviously was a terrible historical event, but I mean, you're American, you're Turkish, I'm French. It doesn't affect us, of course, like personally or in our blood. I mean, David literally lives in Istanbul, so maybe it does affect him in an ancestral sense. It doesn't affect us in an ancestral sense, but it's it is affecting the church, and I think this is not a clear reference or direct reference, but it is implied to the Reductio Graecorum, to the ideas that yes, the papacy did not sanction the crusade, but it greatly took advantage of it afterwards. I mean, maybe you should read a passage of the Reductio Graecorum. It compares the Orthodox Church to a rebellious daughter that was quelled by providence of the of this pillage. So, of course, this sets up the ideas that coercion became the norm in the East. That many of these documents that try to reconcile both parts and so on were made under coercion of the West against the weakened East. So it is significant in an ecclesial sense, and the classic argument is to say, hey, don't you dare bring up the Fourth Crusade, the Pope condemned it, and that's it. No, here it is clearly showing that it had ecclesial repercussions. So that's another argument that just away.
Yeah, those are great points. Do you want me to bring up a different section, or do you want to keep going with this?
I mean, we can switch point by point. Maybe we should read the part for the viewers.
So it says, yeah, I'll read it. During the 12th century, the role of the Roman. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong point. To about the Crusade part. Is that what you're saying? The Fourth Crusade resulted in the plundering of Constantinople and the establishment of parallel Latin hierarchies in the remaining ancient sees of the Greek Church. Though he discouraged the Venetians from conquering Constantinople, Pope Innocent III consequently appointed a Latin patriarch in Constantinople as well as in Alexandria. Hold on a second. Yeah, here we go. I got something in my eye. The decisions of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 were imposed particularly on the churches of Jerusalem and Cyprus. The principle whereby the Greeks could keep their liturgical rituals but had to accept the Bishop of Rome as their head and commemorate him was practiced especially in Cyprus. Cross-reference the Latin synods of Limassol of 1220 and from Augusta 1222 and the Bulla Cypria of Pope Alexander IV in 1260. In many such cases, the Greek clergy consisted from now on as belonging to the Latin Church were forced to participate in Latin liturgical actions. The atmosphere worsened with the polemical attitude of the theologians denouncing the Eastern usages of the errors of the Greeks or the errors of the schismatics. Which, by the way, Contra Era Graecorum is based on forgeries.
Yeah, but much of it is. And the next point that I had, it talks about Saint Philotius Kokkinos and others. It kind of makes a statement about recognizing the so-called Palamites, which I don't think I don't think they just said it just to say something, because especially today in the Roman Catholic Church, though historically Saint Gregory Palamas was seen as this villain and so on and so forth, today in the Roman Catholic Church he is recognized as a saint in the Eastern Catholic churches, and even Pope John Paul II refers to him as a holy man, as a saint. And so this reflects a very big shift in the Roman Catholic attitude towards the East. Well, one of the many examples of it, I think 1.11 very much, I mean, I'll read 1.11 for you guys. It says, during the second millennium in the East, the conciliar institution functioned according to the canonical principles of Apostolic Canon 34, where the Patriarch of Constantinople as the protos and the bishops present in Constantinople participated in sessions of the Endomusa Synod. Through the Endomusa Synod, the Church expressed a form of permanent synodality in which the patriarchs of the East present in Constantinople or their representatives and other bishops were convoked by the Patriarch of Constantinople to make synodal decisions. So this is an admission that the Orthodox ecclesiological system is apostolic and ancient. They're basically admitting that, and you know, chapter 5 is already trying to make an argument by making that admission with the whole, like, you know, two lungs of the same church kind of language and idea. Sorry. But I think it's very important that we recognize this admission, because again, this is a Roman Catholic Church admitting that the Orthodox ecclesiological structure is patristic, it's ancient, it's apostolic, and it's canonical. Whereas it admits that some of the things that the Roman Catholic Church did in history were uncanonical and it went against the ancient canons. So as Snek and Jay has pointed out, I mean, this might as well have been written by any of us, because these are the arguments that we have been making for years.
By the way, you see it. I've got that right there on the screen. So, and I think that this one, Apostolic Canon 34, is a big admission in the Chieti document too, right?
Because you already mentioned.
Yeah.
It. So, just for people who don't know, because I know there are some viewers that might just come to Orthodoxy, just learn a little bit about it. Apostolic Canon 34 is significant. So, it's part of a collection of canon. The usually agreed upon date is that it's from 4th century Syria. So I don't know if they admit that it's apostolic, but the debate concerning the canons, the Roman Church historically did not accept the collection of canons up until I think 20. At least they didn't accept the full collection of the apostolic canon, and this is part of the later collection of the apostolic canons. And that's already mentioned in the previous document in Chieti, that this was a principle. And Apostolic Canon 34 is just a pearl of early Orthodox ecclesiology. It establishes the relation between a primate, so a first, but strictly restricts the ideas that this primate has a supremacy. It says that the church is organized with a head of bishops for nations. So that's also another argument. You have national churches. Well, you have 4th century document within the Roman Empire that says that the church can be organized by nations.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I've made this point many times, and it's like this. Don't you understand? This is the ancient synodality view: is that the bishops would be chosen in this way, and then you would have a protos amongst them. It's from these ancient canons.
Yeah, and basically this protos is not supreme. He has a primary.
Exactly.
That the synod can still oppose him. The synod can oppose him. The synod can oppose his decision. He derives his authority from the synod, but the synod needs to obey him in as much as they're in agreement.
And let's make one last point right before you go on, because every Roman Catholic will say, yeah, but it's not talking about the Bishop of Rome. He doesn't count. No, there's never an exception. You see, there's never this, by the way, this applies to everyone except the Bishop of Rome. And that's how they treat every canon and all the councils that goes against the Vatican I view, is they just say, well, but that's not counting, that Rome doesn't count in that. It never makes the concession that, well, this is for everybody except Rome.
Yeah, I mean, you can even say that it applies to Rome in as much as it shows what the primacy is understood at that time. So I'm just going to read it because
it also applies to Rome. Yeah, please do. But it also applies to Rome by the fact that the document just admitted that the Roman way of selecting the Roman bishop changed in the 12th century.
Yeah. So Canon 34 says, the bishops of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as their head, and do nothing of consequence without his consent. But each may do those things only which concern his own parish and the country places which belong to him, to it. But neither let him who is first do anything without the consent of all, for so there will be unanimity and God will be glorified through the Lord in the Holy Spirit. So that's really good, because it shows that the primarial head has a real power, but this power cannot go against his own synod. So this canon is a proof that we have we believe them to be apostolic, but even if you want to be critical about it, from the 4th century onward, a very clear definition of church relations that include both synodality and primacy. And when a bit later it will say that even under the Ottoman Turks and even under Peter the Great, which reformed the Russian church, like the Lutherans and so on, when they say that we retain and we continue to follow this canon, it means that even under all these adverse consequences, the main basis of ecclesiology, which is primacy and synodality, was retained in the Orthodox Church. And that's great.
And on that same point, let's look at what the Chieti document said in section 18 from a few years earlier. It says, from the First Ecumenical Council onward, major questions regarding faith and canonical order in the Church were discussed and resolved by appealing to the final authority of the Roman bishop. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't say that. It says by ecumenical councils. Although the bishop of Rome was not personally present at those councils, in each of those cases, he was represented by the legates, and he agreed with the council's conclusions after the fact. The church's understanding of the criteria for reception as a council, being ecumenical, developed over the course of the first millennium. For example, prompted by historical circumstances, the Seventh Ecumenical Council of Nicaea II gave a detailed description of the criteria that they understood. The council itself says that the agreement of the symphonia of the heads of the churches in cooperation synergeia of the Bishop of Rome and the agreement of all of the other patriarchates. Thus, an ecumenical council must have its proper number in the sequence of ecumenical councils and teaching in accord with previous councils. Thus, reception by the church as a whole has always been the ultimate criteria for the ecumenical nature of a council, for ecumenicity of council. So wait a minute. That is exactly the opposite of what every Roman Catholic apologist says. They say what makes it an ecumenical council is the approval of the Pope ultimately. That is not what this says. It says no, reception by the church as a whole, which is what Orthodoxy always argues, and they always say, then you can't know what a council is because that ain't going to be the whole church, blah, 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 blah. And their own documents say what we say. We repeat their documents, and they think that we're being weirdos and crazy. No, that's what your documents say. That's Chieti right there in section 18.
Yeah, and on that point, I mean, the Roman Catholic system, it isn't any different when it comes to, receptionism, because at the end of the day, the Pope is determined by the same factor, right? Does the church recognize the Pope as a Pope? Well, any decision that the Pope makes is recognized on that basis, right? So why is Pope Francis the Pope and not an anti-Pope according to the Roman Catholic system? I think even 1 Peter 5 was at the website. I mean, they have an article making this exact argument that it's the reception, that how the Pope is received is how it is verified that the Pope is indeed the Pope. It's the same. It's a very similar logic at the very least. Though I will also add that there's also actual, episcopal standards that are employed, right? That the patriarchs have to accept this in a synodal manner, right? So these things are also factored in to understand how the church receives councils and the decisions made by those councils universally as well. So there's that point as well. And I think in a sense, I will say that Alexandria document does, for the most part, accurately reflect the Orthodox ecclesiological system by referring to it as synodality, for the most part, as I've said.
Snek, did you want to say anything here, or before I pull up another Chieti section?
I mean, yeah, you can go to Chieti. I think it's important. I think we're gonna cover this a bit later, but this like the new document has copious examples of Orthodox second millennium vis-a the papacy binding councils, and it mentioned Kokinos because there's a dogmatic civil war in Rome right now. So the Neo-Thomist faction, which was leading at some point, is no longer leading, and this is a quiet endorsement of the genius of the Palamites, quote unquote. So yeah, go ahead with Chieti.
Yeah. I just want to make one short comment. One of the councils that it is hinting at in 1.12 at the last sentence says that the profession of Lyons was rejected by the Church of Constantinople in 1285. It doesn't note the council, but this happened in the Synod of Blackernay, where the Council of Lyons was promptly rejected.
Yes.
And what that council did is, in fact, elaborate a Orthodox understanding of energetic procession as a counter understanding to certain statements about church fathers, specifically one of St. John Damascus, where he says that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son. The Council of Blackernay basically showcased an Orthodox theological understanding of the idea of the Holy Spirit proceeding from the Father through the Son, right? So it is referring, in fact, to another Orthodox council that, again, was accepted by all Orthodox Christians as an official response against certain filioquist arguments from the Roman Catholics.
And doesn't the document, I think it's the new one, doesn't it admit that the Palamite theological quote development was from Maximus and the Cappadocians, which
Yeah, like it says it's
Yeah.
elaborated. Let me find it. This is
It's in
let me-
1.13.
yeah, 1.13.
Yeah.
So 1.10 says, in spite of these trials, so the difficulties after the Crusades and all, there still were those in the East who cultivated good ecclesial relations and work for the restoration of unity. So, we're not the bad schismatic Greeks. Great patriarchs with deep theological understanding, such as Philotheos Kokkinos, so a disciple of Gregory Palamas, examine the possibility of convoking an ecumenical council that will provide a solution for the division. And in point 13, it says, during the 4th century, the hesychast controversy provoked by Balaam, a monk of Calabria, arose in the east. The monks of Mount Athos delegated St. Gregory Palamas to answer the challenges of Balaam. During the 4th century, 4 synods in Constantinople defended the distinction between the essence and the uncreated energy of God, developed by St. Gregory Palamas on the basis of fathers of the church such as St. Basil of Caesarea and St. Maximus the Confessor. These events indicate the continuing practice of synodality in the East. That's a wonderful text. So it's saying that, Palamas didn't just pull this thing by himself. Balaam was the one who was actually attacking a previous tradition that was held in Mount Athos. And the Synod of Constantinople were reunited to formulate a dogmatic and binding defense of this doctrine. And this shows that synodality remained in the East. The text doesn't say that synodality was maintained that well in the West. So that's really interesting. So
there's a lot of admissions.
Councils we had many.
I've got. Thank you. Yeah. So I've got. I finally got that part put up on the screen here. So you'll notice, as Snek read, right, that it's admitting the essence energy debate. It says it was caused by Barlaam, provoked by Barlaam, but it note that the uncreated energy distinction is developed by Palamas out of yoga. Out of made-up theology of the Middle Ages, out of polytheism. No, what all the Roman Catholics say? All of that nonsense. No, it's developed, quote unquote, from who? Cappadocians and Maximus, exactly. As we always point out. So this is literally what we say. 14th, 15th century witness a radical change in the political sphere, and I want to note this because they're admitting. Everybody knows what's in Unum Sanctum, right? Unum Sanctum is not just a document that says you have to also, every creature on earth must be subject to the Roman pontiff for salvation. Yes, it says that, and everybody knows that, but that's not all it's saying. It's saying that you must be subject to the Roman pontiff in matters temporal. In other words, you have to accept the temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop over all the world as also part of your salvation, you see. It's not just, are you accepting the, quote, Catholic faith to be saved? No, it's the Catholic faith, which includes the universal temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop to be saved, you see. The document is admitting that. It says to reaffirm papal supremacy in the temporal order. So they're admitting that, yes, this geopolitical earthly papal power, right, is also the basis for the Western schism of the 3 popes. This is what we bitch about all the time. Wait a minute. So Peter moves his see to France for 75 years, and I'm supposed to accept that that's all what? That's what Jesus intended in the 1st century, was to set up a giant palace in France where the see of Peter's in Avignon? And why did that happen? Well, it happened because the papacy became a geopolitical, historical power tool, right? It's not primarily a thing to adjudicate doctrine. It's the Pope's now calling his own wars. He's got his own army, right? If you watch the Borgias, he's got his own army at this time. This document is admitting all that. That's all the stuff that we bitch about all the time.
That's really interesting because many people will quote Unam Sanctam in a vacuum without understanding the context. And here's the context. Is
exactly.
Given. The Unam Sanctam says, if you do not submit to the Pope in every way, you're going to hell. But it was a claim of the Pope to try to coerce people with actual temporal power, kings, namely the King of France, and France is
Yes.
going to come up again and again. So we can see that the French king simply didn't take kindly to it. The papacy was basically subjugated shortly after this, and we had a talking specifically about that. So that's really interesting as well. It just means that the papacy isn't protected, and when we
Yes.
quote when someone quotes unam sanctam, saying, hey, that's the church showing the full power. No, it was pretty much an act of desperation at this point, because the papacy ended up captive. They call it a captivity.
This is basically admitting the Frankish thesis. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit after the Frankish Empire.
Right, it's after Charlemagne, but it's the principle that the papacy has become a political tool, right? And that principle is still exaggerated by the 14th and 15th century, right? So Charlemagne's 800, but the point is that there's this revolution that has taken place in the East, which is admitted by Dvornik and by Congar, right? So the Gregorian reforms, and after the Gregorian reforms, I mean, you have that period of 100 years of Germanic papacy, and then we get the shift over into Avignon papacy and all that. But it's the principle that this is a world power now, and it's mainly focused on geopolitical world power, and theology and doctrine become secondary. And the reason I'm saying that is that that's still the case. So the reunion attempts that we get later on, like Brest and others, those are actually other further manifestations of this point, which is that it's no longer primarily about the theological disputes. Look at the first 7 councils. Is it about geopolitical temporal power? No, the disputes in the councils are about Christology, Trinity, incarnation, energies, icons. Now in the second millennium in the Latin Church, the disputes keep being about the role of the Pope. Why is that? Well, it's again because when the Pope offers union to the East, it's basically, look at Melkites, look at all the scale of what the people in the Eastern Uniate churches, they have a scale from I only accept 7 councils all the way over to basically being almost Roman Catholic or Latin, so to speak, right?
Another argument that just cut short, like it literally says, this episode was followed for a few years later by the exile of the papacy in the French city of Avignon, where the popes lived for 70 years under the control of the French monarchy. So the argument that the Byzantine Church is just like, it's just Caesar or papism, it's just the emperor who dictates whatever he wants, which is not true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Against the emperor. The church is controlled by the Tsar or by Putin or by the Turkish Sultan. All of that, like, you can see that, and the idea is that in order to not have anything to say to the worldly authorities, the church needs to become a state by itself and a worldly authority. Well, that's contradicted, because the Pope had a state at that point, and
Right.
that's specifically why it got subjugated by the French monarchy. And we will see that throughout history, there still had been this tension with the French monarchy until an event, and that's also a very funny admission that we're going to see in a few minutes.
Okay, so what section do you want me to pull up next?
1.15 is, I think, the next big one, because it talks about the Council of Constance, it talks about Haec Sancta, and it talks about conciliarism. So for those who don't know, there was a period where there were 3 popes in the Roman Catholic Church between the 14th and the 15th centuries. This problem was resolved by the Council of Constance, which is an ecumenical council according to the Roman Catholic Church. It published a decree called Haec Sancta, and this document says that the highest authority in the church belongs to a council. Now, afterwards, the Roman Catholic Church said, no, we're going to ignore this, right? We're going to reject this. But it developed this thesis in order to solve the issue of 3 different papal claimants, because, well, you have 3 different papal claimants, and they all have some kind of legitimacy. So which one are you going to be choosing? Well, you need a council, a true council, in order to choose the correct pope, but you need to have a correct pope to call the council, right? And so they try to get themselves away from this contradiction by trying to use a temporary fix-up. And once that fix-up occurred, they just, okay, well, just ignore this. This was just just something that we kind of just had to do for the time being. But that's not really a valid outlook, because at the end of the day, this has some kind of dogmatic approval, and it ended up being a legitimate position within the Roman Catholic Church throughout many, many different years. And so this document itself treats conciliarism in a very negative fashion. But in fact, what's really interesting is that conciliarism, I myself won't say it's the exact same thing as synodality, but it's very similar in many key aspects to synodality. Of course, this document again looks at it from a negative perspective, while it looks at synodality from a positive perspective. But I think it's kind of them trying to cover their tracks a little bit, at least from my perspective. And the Council of Constance is really, I mean, the whole thing is just a great illustration of the Roman Catholic system not working, particularly in the 14th and the 15th centuries. That's kind of how I would look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Fiasco.
It is a great point, and it reminds me of what the funny satirical account on Twitter, Tradcat Watch, said the other day, which was that for the Roman Catholic, for the Tradcat especially, the papal magisterium is a thing that exists in theory, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with the actual history of the church. It's just like when that girl called in last night or the night before, and she was like, you always want to go to history. I want to talk about the idea of authority and how that kind of tells us that the papacy is the case. Oh, so you mean an abstraction and not the actual historical papacy? So this is
it just makes sense. That doesn't first of all, we're looking for a historical church as instituted, and second of all, many things can make sense. You look at many other republicanism makes sense. That's not a superb argument, It's the idea that there needs to be an authority. Yeah, well, you have to develop the authority. We can have primacy within our system, sure.
Yeah, and if there was usually the admission of those people is that it took the church the first 1,000 years to realize that synodality, collegiality, conciliarism didn't work the best. So the next 1,000 years, they figured out papalism. So it's like, wait a minute. So where was the Holy Spirit guiding the church in the first 1,000 years? That the Holy Spirit wasn't smart enough to tell the church that the best, most pragmatic, effective way to govern the church is the top-down God, emperor, monarchy. Well,
we're looking for a historic church. So if the claims of the organization of your church needs to rely on modern communication technologies, that really doesn't really work.
Well, that's why I asked her. I asked her. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So that's why Vatican I is really modern in that sense, because you can see there's a spirit of absolutism breathing here. It even says that you should not cut ways of communication with the Pope, probably referring to
great point
and circled or the telegraph or whatever. So if a historic church needs to rely on modern or industrial ways of communication, if that's part and parcel and a necessity in your system, probably your system is not apostolic.
Yeah, and she essentially went on to admit, the church of the first 1,000 years is not the Vatican I church. Exactly, that's our whole point. So, who's the historic church? Who's the church of the first 1,000 years? I mean, that's the key issue the key point of debate between a Roman Catholic and Orthodox person. And if it's not the Vatican I system, that's it. That system is canceled out. It doesn't matter. So that's why I always ask these people, how would anybody, the average person in the year 300, remember the papal system is supposed to be so practical and so obvious. Well, there was no internet, modern communications like Snek's saying. So how is a person in the year 300, prior to the First Ecumenical Council, how am I supposed to recognize what the true church is in the year 300 if the papal system is true? Am I supposed to, by osmosis, if I live in Ephesus, I'm supposed to know what's going on in Rome? If I live in Ephesus, it's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you can't make it this apologetics of post-Vatican I apologetics, right? And if that was how the church operated in the first 700 years or the first 1,000 years, how come none of the church fathers are doing post-Vatican I style apologetics? They would have been simply proving the church in this Vatican I way. Well, but it didn't. The church hadn't evolved yet to have this truth. Exactly. So we see that this position, on the one hand, is not the church of the first 1,000 years. Yet they constantly quote mine and pick things out of the first 1,000 years to try to prove that it was the church of the first 1,000 years. Yet they then turn around and say, well, all the counter evidence just proves development, you see. Well, this is a ridiculous, unfalsifiable position. So it's not the church of the first 1,000 years, but also it's there. But it also developed, and it's a completely different structure of the church in the second millennium. Sure, but that's because we figured out a more practical way to run the church. Okay, but again, what you think is more practical is not the point here. If that's not the structure that Christ laid down, and remember, the faith is once for all delivered to the saints. How can there be something that's good enough in the first, second, and third century, but not good? But that's not good enough in the year 1000, 1100, 1200, 1300. You see.
Yeah, and you want to know the funniest thing about this is that the church fathers, especially since Eusebius of Caesarea, they actually do make theological argument for a centralized administration with a single head. They do it for the emperor, and never do it for if it was clear that we have one God, therefore we need to have one supreme head of the church. Therefore the papacy. I mean, all the arguments were already here.
Now, wait, real quick detour, Snek. I have a question for you, Snek, because I think you were saying this in the comments of the discussion. So, in terms of Lateran 649, and we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, but to me it looks like actually an egg on the face argument against the papacy. Roman Catholics want to use Lateran 649 as a papal proof, but to me it looks like it's not, because weren't you making the point that Lateran 649 was not conceived of as ecumenical at the time because the Pope couldn't get the emperor to approve it? Is that correct?
So that's really interesting that you mention it. I think some would say it's ecumenical at the time, namely St. Maximus. But St. Maximus doesn't...
No, I understand. But I'm saying from the Roman Catholic view, they don't count it as one.
Yeah, they don't count it. But if you look at some of the claims there, which are of course saying that Rome is a pillar of the faith, because at the time it was the only jurisdiction that maintained the faith, so it's well deserved. But they did not accept it. And if you go to the acts of this synod by Father Price, who's a Roman Catholic, it would say, Rome is of course, there's really kind and appreciative words for Rome, but the Roman delegates themselves did not understand the synod to be ecumenical. They understood that without the approval of the other patriarchates, it wouldn't work. And I found some other historians, Latin historians, like Libertus of Carthage, who says this for Chalcedon. They say that the legates wouldn't want a synod to happen without the approval of the emperor and the Eastern churches, because nobody would take them seriously.
Yeah, and real quick, we'll go back to David. I don't want to leave David out. The reason I'm bringing up 649 is that, so this is the first attempt of the Roman bishop to call his own council with, I think they had like 108 bishops present. So with Roman approval and with 108 bishops, including bishops from the East present, in the Roman Catholic idea of what makes a council an ecumenical council, there's no reason why that should not be a Roman Catholic council if in the year 649 they had the Vatican I mindset. It has all the criteria for an ecumenical council. However, Rome does not count Lateran 649 amongst its ecumenical councils. So this shows us that they clearly, that in that year, in the 7th century, nobody had the mindset that all that's needed for an ecumenical council is simply the approval of the Roman bishop.
And it would have been way easier for the church, because right after this synod, there's a new wave of persecutions, and Maximus gets tortured and exiled. Pope Saint Martin is killed. So if there was a power to definitely adjudicate forever, with everybody agreeing, it would have been over then and then. Yeah.
David, I want to go back to you if you want to move on to a specific point or area.
Yeah. The next part that I was thinking of, it talks about the Council of Florence next. But before we move on to Council of Florence, one thing I think Snek will especially will like to deal with this. It starts to talk about Gallicanism, right? That conciliarism gave rise to Gallicanism. and that it points out that that Gallicanism lasted until the 19th century, until I think Napoleon, and Snek being French, I think he has a lot of knowledge regarding Gallicanism. So before we talk about the Council of Florence, Snek, would you like to give some comments about the whole like the Gallicanist movement and how it kind of resisted papal supremacy in the history of the West in some form?
Yeah, so this goes back to point 1.15, and it says that the Council of Constance issued a deposition of the Pope and the idea of all the popes, and named another one, and stated that the Pope is as an authority that is under the Council, and we would agree. We would say that a primate has authority, but he cannot like overrule an ecumenical council on his own. And here, I think it's probably the first point of the document I don't really appreciate. So it said, "Oh, synodality is great, but when the Pope got humiliated like this, it's actually not synodality; it's conciliarism, which is just the Latin root of the same term." And then it says that this system is based on a civic Roman understanding. Well, didn't you just agree that argument that that the donation of Constantine was used by the Roman Church? Because that was a civic Roman document that was supposed to be a law, a donation passed by Constantine. So saying that the integration of Roman civic institutions into the church is inherently disqualifying, it's a bit weird. You still have dioceses, you still have even the central Rome, the earliest attestation of Rome having a central role, back to Clement of Rome. It's because Rome is the center of the empire, literally, or it is. So I think it's a bit of a cop-out. I think that this is a point where the document tries to not give in too much, because like literally if you say
they can't give everything, exactly.
Yeah, so that's basically barring this, and then saying, this idea, conciliarism, it led to the French church being Gallican, meaning basically autocephalous under a king. But no, like if you look at the Gallican writers, they do not say, of course they mention Ex Sancta, of course they mention the Council of Basel, of course they mention these, of course they mention Honorius, but they're not saying, oh, we do it because of the Roman civic institution, or because of Ex Sancta proper. They will quote, you have people like Bossuet and so on. They will mention the Merovingian canons. They will mention the canons of the ancient Church of Gaul. They will mention the Carolingian canons. They will mention all of these councils that shows that this system, conciliarism, which really is synodality, was already established. And we had a whole talk about this, but there even was a triple proclamation, like in the Byzantine Empire, meaning that the king, like, he's not the one who chose the bishop, but he approved them. He approved them, and the people also acclaim them, which is something we still see in the Orthodox Church. So I think this is a bit of a cop-out. I think they are trying to give as much, to concede as many points as possible to the Orthodox, but not concede either Gallicanism or conciliarism of Ex Sancta. We would agree with Ex Sancta. And actually, going to the Council of Florence, a big part of why the delegation came to Florence is because they looked at what was happening in the West, and they saw, oh, look, the Roman Church just said the council is above the Pope, so maybe we'll be able to discuss again. And we'll see that that's not exactly what happened. Actually, the opposite happened. But basically, I don't think we can sweep Gallicanism under the rug. I think it's coming later, again in the document, so we'll talk about it later. But essentially, Gallicanism is an autocephalous church under.
Well, I was going to say, didn't you make an argument a long time ago on one of our streams that the ancient French church was autocephalous, something like that?
Yeah. It recognized Rome as a patriarch.
Yeah.
But it was organized by itself, and you needed to go through the king, and the king saw himself as a protector of the church in his realm. And of course, even the subjugation of the papacy in Avignon was an action to protect his church. And you have, for example, council of the clergy. At some point, kings were getting assassinated. By the way, most of the French kings that got assassinated were assassinated by Catholics, theocrats. That's interesting.
Oh, interesting.
And they proclaim, for example, that the king is a is a statue of God. So he's basically saying that he's got an iconographic role, and therefore attacking him is attacking God. That's exactly the same thing you've got with Byzantine emperors.
Right.
That's the same rhetoric. So the idea is that this was a novel thing that was that didn't have any. No, that's not what it was. You can see it from the conversion of the Frankish people from Clovis in 511, the day the year he died. He convened a council, and you already have all this. You already have the rights of bishops being preserved. You already have the triple approval of the bishops. This is already in place. This is not something that was invented. So something that was solidified, especially when Rome meddled, but it was not a new thing. And the Gallicans were clear about that.
By the way, for those in the I want to remind everybody in the chat too that the link for the Alexandria document is too long to put into the YouTube chat, so I'm going to include the link. I did put a Twitter. I tweeted out the link, and you can go to my Twitter and get the full document. But after this, I'll put underneath the show description both documents so you can pull them up. They're not very long. I highly recommend everybody read them because, I mean, they're like 90% conceding all the points that we make. So look for the documents if you're watching this later on in the show description. Go ahead, whoever.
Snek, you want to continue?
No, I think we're gonna touch on Gallicanism a bit later, but now let's go to Florence, and this is up your alley.
Yeah, well, I suppose so. Yeah. So the Council of Florence, Snek already made this point. There was at the same time a conciliars assembly in Basel, which is what convinced a lot of the Orthodox bishops to go to Florence, like well, not to Florence specifically, but to have a council with Roman Catholics because they saw the encouraging developments. But later on, the church, again, it basically ruled, oh, well, that decision we made, actually, we don't follow that decision anymore. We're just going to, scrub it off. And the Council of Florence happened instead. And there were various different theological debates. I think I want to kind of note some specific things. A lot of people kind of a big mistake some people online do is that they look at the kind of the pet theories of certain figures in the council, and they use their views in order to push, oh, this is the official view of this specific issue, like the Filioque or whatever. But one of the biggest blunders of the Council of Florence is that it says that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son as a cause, right? It says this very explicitly, that it does so in the Greek sense. And the council also rejected the interpretation of causality as having any understanding of mediate causality. So when it speaks about the Greek sense of causality, specifically refers to being uncaused, like not uncaused cause, but being cause at all, right? So the Son is not a cause of the Holy Spirit at all, whereas the Council of Florence says it is. But St. Maximus Confessor says that the Holy Spirit, that the Son is not a cause of the Holy Spirit. So this is one of the big blunders of the Council of Florence, is that it directly contradicts St. Maximus's this letter to Marinus, which at first the bishops at the council said, oh yeah, this is in fact from St. Maximus, and then it says, oh, actually it's not from St. Maximus. So there's a lot of really interesting things that happen in the Council of Florence, but we see the same theme in the Council of Florence, in spite of the various different theological disputes, which at the end of the day, as long as you kiss the papal feet, everything is fine. And one of the things that Ostromov notes in his book on the Council of Florence is that after the council, right after the union occurred, the Greek bishops didn't even commune with the Roman Catholics. They didn't even, to my knowledge, they didn't even say the creed with the Filioque. They said without the Filioque, and they pretty much acted as if nothing happened. But a key part of this, and many Roman Catholic apologists push misinformation about this. They said the Council of Florence is proof that Orthodoxy is wrong because apparently the Orthodox world completely accepted it. Well, in fact, the only church that can be spoken of accepting this council is the Greek church. And the patriarch died before he even signed it. And it's well known that the so-called the signature of the patriarch is not it's in fact forged. It's not the real signature of the patriarch. The patriarch died before the council was signed by the Greek church. So the patriarch didn't even sign the council. And this document admits, in fact, this was not received. It says so in 1.19, that this council was not received by the Greek church. So it wasn't even being contested to being received by the other churches. It was not received by the Greek church, right? Even by the Greek church. And it was officially rejected in 1484. And it also had the participation of the four Eastern Patriarchates. And it says, through this present synodal tomos, we overturned the council which was convened in Florence, along with its definition and the propositions contained within it. And we declare by this tomos that the Council of Florence is null and void. Now, this is the official declaration. Prior to this, the Council of Florence wasn't accepted either, right? Not by Constantinople, nor by any other Orthodox church. So at most, you had a couple of rogue figures becoming Roman Catholic, and that's the end result of the Council of Florence. So a lot of Roman Catholics use this as a gotcha against the Orthodox Christians, but in fact, this document admits that the Orthodox Church didn't accept this council, that it was really only the Greek Church that could be spoken of accepting this council at a time, and even by the very standards of the Greek Orthodox Church itself, that didn't occur. Those conditions were not met. So it's similar to the Council of Lyons, in a sense that the Greek Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church in general did not accept the Council of Florence.
By the way, the document also says that the Council of Lyons was rejected by the church.
Exactly.
So, the arguments that, the schism never happened. Like you're actually in union with us because you accepted Lyon and Florence. And no, like they see that we rejected it. They even mention a council that authoritatively rejected it. So again, the Orthodox Church has the ability to make binding decisions in the second millennium.
Well, they already admit, Benedict in his books admits that the Orthodox Church maintained its faith for the last 1,000 years. Oh, okay. Then isn't that an admission that we don't need the papacy? if we maintained the Orthodox faith for the last 1,000 years, then what is it exactly that the papacy gives us? And when I look at contemporary papism, I don't see all of the practical unity and guidance and clarity that it's supposed to give. Like all the things they claim it gives, it doesn't actually give. But I did want to add too that if you guys remember, I love bringing this up, not because it is necessarily 100% a proof of anything, but when a lot of these dialogues started happening, more recently, there were publications and Catholic apologists that were already noticing, hey, wait a minute, we're already basically admitting that Vatican I's universalizing claims are contrary to historical fact. And so here is this one I love to note that since publishing Orthodoxy and Roman Primacy in 2011, I continue to follow the dialogues, Dr. Adam DeVille, and he says, it's just a fact that the first 1,000 years of papacy weren't Vatican I. Yeah, exactly. Regional limitations to the Bishop of Rome. Regional limitations to the Bishop of Rome. That's admitting our point. Now, Roman Catholics always say, well, who cares? He's just one guy. It doesn't matter. Yeah, but these are documents and councils and synods, excuse me, not councils, but documents and theological commissions that Francis has no problem with. He approves of these things, and as Snek said, Francis cited Balamond or the one of these Chieti, one of these was cited by the papacy, right? I mean, they're papally approved commissions, right?
So many of them are approved. Let me pull up the documents. This is part of our mega series, by the way. So it is in the document of the Pontifical Council for promoting Christian unity, and it is an ecumenical vadevecum, and the Pope mentions Ravenna, it mentions Chieti, it mentions Balamand. So you can just pull up the doc.
Now, the reason we want to mention this is that now the Roman Catholics will say, well, yeah, but it doesn't matter because it's not a binding. So, but here's the thing, and this is why I always stress this, is that for the Pope to teach or promote error, or any other bishop or layperson in the Catholic Church, there's no requirement that to be a heretic, it has to be binding. Because if that was the case, then nobody could be a heretic in the Roman Catholic Church because it would require that person bind everyone to it. Martin Luther couldn't bind anyone to his heresies, and yet he's condemned by the Pope, and he's called a heretic. So likewise, it doesn't matter who is saying it or what the degree of authority that they have is. If someone is publicly teaching and affirming and promoting heresies or schism, then they're guilty of the sin of heresy and schism in Roman Catholic moral theology and canon law. So if Francis is promoting and pushing these documents and citing them and saying that, it doesn't matter the level of authority that he's putting behind the documents. He's promoting and pushing something heretical, heterodox, something wrong theologically. So if we are in error as Orthodox, and if these documents are admitting our positions, then the documents are in error and are heterodox, and Francis promoting and pushing them makes Francis in error and heterodox. And so it doesn't matter how many thousands of times Roman Catholics come back with saying, it wasn't infallibly binding. It doesn't matter. Infallibly binding has nothing to do with whether the person pushing it is pushing heresy or not. It's a really simple point. But they always deflect into this ridiculous reply that, yeah, but he doesn't bind us to it, so it doesn't count. Martin Luther couldn't bind anyone to his heresies. So does that mean it doesn't count? No. The Pope still excommunicated Luther for his heresy. It's a really simple point, Roman Catholics.
And I think it applies to Florence here too, because one key takeaway from how it discusses Florence here is that the Pope wasn't really in a mindset of uniting the churches here. He was in a mindset of asserting his authority because there was conciliarism going around in the West, a resurgence of it. So the idea is that the documents of Florence, they just show a Pope in a strong position that just asserts himself as he is. Not really. It shows him in a position of weakness, trying to fight for keeping the control of his own flock at the expense of unity with the East. So again, the Greek bishops came thinking, we're gonna, conciliarism is back. We're gonna be able to be treated as equals, and the Pope just tried to be as strong as possible in order to rein in the Western bishops. And again, that's a big problem. It shows that Rome here failed. Like, if you think that this is terrible, this is tragic, this schism is bad, that's a huge failure by Rome because of the Pope trying to inflate himself. That's literally what Paul says is going to cut you off from the church to the Roman Church in Romans 11.
Yeah, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. He's not talking to the church. He's talking only to the lay people in the church. So that these are the deflections that you get with that.
Yeah. I mean, no, like I'm not making a complete theological argument here. I'm just saying that.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I'm just saying that they have all of these just ridiculous replies, right? Like, Paul clearly is saying to the entire Roman church that if you're arrogant, you can be cut off. No, he's only talking to the lay people in the church. He's not saying, no, what are you talking about? He's talking about the Church of Rome. It's the letter to the church at Rome. That's all the people in the church at Rome, warning that you can be cut off. Anyway, I'm just going on a tangent. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So that's the first takeaway, that these assertions, just like unam sanctam, it's not an assertion that's made from a position of power, but of desperation, and that's what stops the discussion. And then, of course, it explains that the council was held under coercion. So coercion, according to Saint Athanasius, according to Roman Catholic apologists themselves, when it comes to Liberius,
I was going to say they'll say Liberius doesn't count because it was under coercion.
Yeah, but here it says, it doesn't count because it's under coercion. Like, Florence was under coercion. It literally says that it was accepted under pressure. So if we have canonical norms, if we understand, I think that's quite easy to understand. Like, everybody agrees. Ephesus 2 is not ecumenical because they started to riot during the council. Coercion is sufficient to reject the authority and the legitimacy of a council, and here it says that there were coercions. So I've seen apologists say, actually it's not true, that's an Orthodox slander, that's only in their sources. Well, we seem to agree here, so let's be charitable and go to the documents that both of churches are approving, or at least your church approves it,
right,
in terms of discussing with all church. So yeah, that probably should be an important part. So some mention about Florence upholding the canons, at least giving lip service, but that doesn't amount to much. But key takeaways: Rome doesn't speak in a position of power, but of desperation, and that's what derails the council. The council is rejected on canonical grounds by the Greeks, as well as other grounds.
I do want to touch on I don't want to close out yet on this because I want to touch on Sardica and Trullo, because it admits a point that I said a long time ago that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just don't want to close out yet, because that the paragraph 19 is also an interesting admission too. Go ahead and finish your thought. I just want to go to 19.
Sure. Like, and another key takeaway is that the Orthodox Church could indeed and had the authority to unite a dogmatic binding council in specifically rejecting the Council of Florence. So that's all the points we've been making all this time. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
Weren't you gonna make a point about?
Yeah, I want to. I want to give everybody the chance to talk. I just didn't want to close it out without going to the admissions in paragraph 19, because I'll pull it up in a second, but it says, I'll read it. Over the centuries, a number of appeals were made to the Bishop of Rome from the East in disciplinary matters, such as the deposition of a bishop. This was made at the Synod of Sardica. Now, remember, the Roman Catholics have made a huge deal of Sardica. And by the way, Ubi has covered the Sardican issue quite well over on his website. But it says that it established rules for such procedure. Sardica was received at Trullo 692, and the canons of Sardica determined that a bishop who had been condemned could appeal to the Bishop of Rome. Now, if you remember when I was arguing with Ibarra years ago, I said, yeah, there was an appeals process. And their argument, their assumption was that, this is only to Rome. Everyone could only just appeal to, because they're presupposing that the only appeals process was just to Rome. Sardica is mentioning, it was a local canon in the West, is mentioning, you can appeal to Rome. However, listen to this. It says, the canons of Sardica determined that a bishop could be condemned. If he was condemned, he could appeal to the Bishop of Rome, and that the latter, if he deemed it appropriate, might order a retrial to be conducted by bishops in the province neighboring the bishop's own. So number one, the appeal is not Rome make the final decision. The appeal is for a retrial with other bishops, which is not a Vatican I style thing. Appeals regarding disciplinary matters were also made to Constantinople. That's exactly what I said. I said the appeals appellate structure and system was not just to Rome, because it's mentioned about Athanasius, it's mentioned about Alexandria is also, if I recall, comes up in this, as well as Constantinople. No, you're making that up. It's just a Rome. Oh, here's your document admitting what I said, that there was an appeals process to other patriarchates.
Yeah. Another.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. One last point. The last sentence, I forgot the last sentence. It's the most important part. It says, appeals to the Bishop of Rome from the East express the communion of the Church. However, this does not mean the Bishop of Rome did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the East. Huge admission in point 19. However, the Bishop of Rome did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the East. I'm sorry, this is Chieti document. I went back to the Chieti document. I wanted to mention that I've got both of these documents pulled up, and they're on the exact same website, so I was on the wrong document. But Chieti document, paragraph 19, is one of the key points I wanted to mention in regard to the Ibarra debate. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I guess we can move to the section from the Reformation to the 18th century, right? Chapter 2, where they talk about some of the things that occurred. 2.1, it reaffirms the admission that Orthodoxy continues to practice the apostolic understanding of synodality, whereas this document admits that there's further developments due to the Protestant Reformation that occurred. It says synodality was still practiced in the East during this difficult periods, and while the Roman Catholic Church was dealing with certain issues in the West, the Orthodox Church was dealing with issues of being under, for example, Ottoman captivity and so on and so forth. In 2.4, it reaffirms this. It talks about various different other councils that the Orthodox Church accepted, right? So this further disproves the whole, you Orthodox can't have councils, you can't make decisions. I hear this over and over and over and over again by many different Roman Catholics, and they think that if they repeat this lie enough, then it's just going to end up being truth. But I'll just read the entirety of 2.4 because it's very important. The juridical millet system assigned all Orthodox living in the Ottoman Empire, irrespective of ethnic considerations, to the Rum millet, dependent upon the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople in ecclesiastical and civil matters. This emphasized the latter's central position within the Orthodox Church, known already from the canonical order, right? This was established in the Second Council, then really very much confirmed in the Fourth Ecumenical Council, right, in Canon 28, and enhanced its importance vis-a-vis the other ancient patriarchates. Despite this new situation, the spirit of synodality was nevertheless preserved. Councils were convoked by the ecumenical patriarch to resolve issues in a synodal way, such as the Council of Constantinople in 1593 to confer the title of patriarch granted earlier to the Metropolitan of Moscow, the Council of Yassi to adjudicate the confession of faith of the Metropolitan of Kiev, Peter Mokhila, and the two great councils of Constantinople in 1638 and 1642. Further synods were convoked in Constantinople 1672, 1691, and by Patriarch Dositius in Jerusalem 1672, which condemned the confession of faith attributed to the Patriarch Kirill Lucaris. So what we see here, and there's a different debate one can make about these various different councils, but what we see here is an admission from this doctrine from the Roman Catholic Church that the Orthodox Church did indeed make dogmatically bounding conciliar decisions, even after the schism, which showcases that from the perspective of the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church can make synodal dogmatic decisions that are bounding to all Orthodox Christians. And again, Roman Catholics have to understand this. This is not just us saying it. Your own church is admitting this right now. You're not just listening. You're not just not listening to us. You're also not listening to your own church. And that's just ridiculous.
And doesn't this prove, by the way, how ridiculous and terrible the apologetics of Lofton and Ibarra are? I mean, this is basically constantly admitting every argument we've made against a lot of their arguments. I mean, Trent Horn, where you at, bro? This is admitting all of our points. So when are the Roman Catholics going to stop giving up their tired old pop apologetics and start dealing with what their own experts in Francis are admitting?
Yeah. Something else that's interesting from this same section, 2.7, so talking about Russia, it mentions the reforms of Peter the Great, Piotr Veliki, which basically, like it says it, and it's probably true to a large extent, that the church administration was reformed, and the Protestant model, the patriarchate was abolished, and then there was a civil servant that administered a permanent synod, and it says that even when strongly under the influence of the state, even at that point, the synodal structure prevailed, and that's what we see today. Like today, the Moscow Patriarchate was reestablished. So, synodality. Even under this sort of captivity, even with this kind of meddling, which is a classic argument as well, the church was controlled by the state, it still prevailed. It still managed to take decisions and to participate to other decisions. Some of the council we've mentioned were approved universally through also the reception of the Russian jurisdiction. That's really interesting.
Yeah, before we move on to chapter 3, I think there's some other additional comments made about Gallicanism, so I think it will be timely if you also covered the whole history of Gallicanism. It's the specific part I am referring to. Give me a second.
So while you're looking for that, while you're looking at that, I'm going to note that, so in the chat, a lot of the Roman Catholics and the people that are asking questions or whatever, it's like you guys are bringing up the same old stuff that we've always talked about for a million years, all of the same old objections. If you want if you want the formula of Hermisdus, there's Ubi's article on that. We've covered that. Ubi's covered all of this. So guys, look, just go read these articles, because today we're talking about the document from Alexandria and the Chieti document. So those are we're not covering all these tired old Roman Catholic objections. We've covered those a million times. So go look at those documents from Ubi on those specifics.
Correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we can go into Gallicanism. I'd like you to have a word on Unitism as well, because there's a section in this. But what's really interesting is that it shows that, of course, the vision of the Pope was reinforced at the Council of Trent, but that basically France maintained its own system, and I'm gonna read 2.3. Provincial synod aimed at implementing the Tridentine reform took place in Italy, in the German Empire, in France, in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Under political pressure, the Roman Catholic bishops of many kingdoms thought greater autonomy with regards to papal primacy. So this was not being accepted. So all the arguments, oh, we are base monarchists and all, no, monarchy was seeing itself in conflict with papal supremacy, with these kind of claims. These episcopalist tendencies, example, Gallicanism in France, Februarianism in Germany, continued to advocate for conciliarism. This is a system that was in place since the Merovingians. The idea that bishops had specific rights. You see that in Clovis already. So the idea that it's a lingering tendency that appear that after the Council of Constance is kind of weird. The French Revolution finally led to the downfall of the Ancien Régime and to the destruction of the state church, which ultimately strengthened the ties between the Church of France and Rome, since after the collapse of the old order, only the papacy had the authority to reorganize the Church. See the Concordat of France and the Congress of Vienna. So these are under Napoleon and post-Napoleon. But you can see that all the argument, we fight against the revolution, we are base monarchists and all this. No, the monarchy was seeing the papacy and these kind of claims as a threat, and they did not allow the papal meddling into their affairs, to a huge extent. And the only thing that could actually make this papal-centered reform happen was literally as a tabula rasa, as a blank slate, the destruction of the revolution. So the idea that that's really common among many French French Roman Catholics, is the idea that the true France is a monarchist France that fought against the revolution, and we cannot accept the revolution. No, literally, the Church of France was autocephalous, Gallican. It was only snuffed out because of the revolution. Rome came only by signing concordats with the post-revolutionary authorities. Literally, I'm not saying that Rome made this happen, but just like the siege of Constantinople, it benefited from it. It's the same thing that you see at the time of the revolution in Russia in 1917. After, you see, for example, Roman Catholic apologists and so on saying, "Oh no, the Tsar is dead, so we can go in, we can benefit from the tabula rasa." That's a terrible thing to admit. Basically, the only reason why the Church of France is not a Gallican autocephalous under a king church, like it always was since Clovis, since the establishment of the kingdom of the Franks, is because of the revolution. That's huge politically. I mean, in terms of ecclesiology, probably less, but in terms of the ecclesial identity of a French person, you can see that the Gallicans were opposed to that, and you can see that in personalities like Abbé Guette, for example, who was a Gallican. He came a little bit after because there was a resurgence of Gallicanism, but he identified clearly the papal claims, the ultramontane claims, as a threat to the legitimate French government.
Yeah, because remember, as we said, the papacy had already become very much a geopolitical power. And so that's also admitted in 2.6, where it says that with all of these attempted reunion councils like Brest, Croatia, Transylvania, Uzhhorod, Serbia, it says the motives for these unions have been contested. There was probably some real desire, but there's a lot of political influence as well. So it's like, haven't we always been saying that the motivation for this wasn't anything to do with theology, but it was papal, right? Yeah, exactly. And this document saying, it says religious and political factors were frequently intertwined.
Oh yeah, like if you see Poland, it's a shift after the end of the Jagiellon dynasty, the shift towards more centralism with links to Rome. You can see that. You can see that also with the Melkites. or in the Far East, often it was linked to the establishment and ability to enter some school institution and so on. So it was baiting people. It was done in ways that are not theological. You can even say coercion sometimes, which again we've seen is even an invalidating factor. So the idea that unitism is actually perceived as a threat towards unity is something that Rome admits now. So the idea that I'm gonna go to an Eastern Catholic Church, I'm gonna be a union to be able to leave all that. Rome itself says, I think, if I don't know if it's in Balamand or if it's in the Cuba document, that it's not a valid way to proceed anymore, because it's perceived as a threat, rightfully so, according to this document.
Well, keep in mind, too, just the mere fact that the Pope has removed the Triple Crown, which the Triple Crown was signified his authority over the temporal domain. I mean, the trads make a big deal about this because it's a symbolic gesture that, oh, okay, by the way, I'm not interested in geopolitical power and supremacy over all temporal authorities like I used to be. Like Unum Sanctum says, you have to believe for salvation. So to be saved in the time of, Unum Sanctum, I had to believe in the temporal power of the Roman bishop. Since the Pope now and Vatican II documents say we're no longer concerned with that, now it's no longer necessary for salvation. So you understand that in the Roman Catholic system, evolving theology means evolving criteria for salvation. I only know what I mean, it depends on the Pope at the time, right? I mean, ultimately, my salvation depends upon what the present day papacy says, which is ridiculous. And they will actually say, well, that's Office of the Keys, bro. Office of the Keys, you got to believe whatever's going on now at the present time. How can the requirement for salvation change? That's crazy.
I mean, ultimately, that's no longer a traditional religion. That's just a pure cult of authority. I think Zizek makes this point. It just says that at this point, it's just follow what the
No, that's, yeah, exactly. That's the same. Justin Popovich says the same thing, too. It's a worship of authority. It's a pure cult of authority, exactly.
Döllinger says that at this point, the Pope is just an oracle of the Tiber, meaning that you have someone that is himself the tradition and the only way to interpret previous traditions. So you cannot look into tradition like we've always done. You cannot look into a book because we're still a religion of scripture. You need to rub the magic lamp and ask your question. You need to consult the oracle of the Tiber. So that was an argument the early Christian would make against the pagans, saying, "Hey, you don't have a solid grounding."
It's against
like you don't. Half of you don't believe in your own tradition, and you don't have a unified text to look towards. We're just back to square one.
Yeah, we're back to square one of pure pagan worship of authority. Exactly. All right, what's next,
and
you
guys? I think, I mean, chapter 3 pretty much starts with semi-admitting this. Right? I mean, it talks about how the papacy adopted the doctrine of the church as a perfect society, meaning that the church was an independent, autonomous, and sovereign society in her own sphere of competence, just as the state was sovereign in temporal affairs. And what it says then next, well, not what it says next, but I mean, combine this at Vatican I and other papal declarations in the past. This is basically admitting that at the start of the 19th century, the church, the Roman Catholic Church saw itself as the head of pretty much both temporal society and, heavenly, that is ecclesial society. So this kind of like amassing of authority, right, that gradually occurred over time is really manifesting itself in Vatican I. And it also notes in 3.2, talks about an epistle where it argues that the supreme authority of the Roman Pontiffs was always recognized in the East. It's really interesting that, it mentions this epistle, but then this document itself says, well, actually, the epistle is kind of wrong. And that to me is quite strange. I mean, it doesn't say it in the paragraph, it doesn't say it explicitly, but I mean, when it talks about papal supremacy, it calls it papal primacy, but really the more correct term is papal supremacy. This document admits papal supremacy as being a doctrine of development, right? And so in a sense, Suprema Patria Apostoli Sede, right, in 1848, which got responded by the Orthodox patriarchs in the encyclical letter of 1848, this document is already admitting that the Roman Catholic perspective is also wrong, at the very least.
Yeah, and it's not just that. Also, Satis Cognitum says it as well, and the argumentation of Pastor Eternus is reasons in a similar way, which is that it's not based on development. It's based on what was always the case and always recognized. But they trade on that ambiguity there of, well, what exactly was recognized? The Peter as the Coryphaeus, Peter as first, Peter as this document says, that the Bishop of Rome giving canonical privileges. Yeah, that's always been recognized. But that doesn't translate into Vatican I's claims of universal supremacy and jurisdiction. That was not always recognized. And so that's why they have to, again, guys, don't you understand? It's like talking to the slow boys out there. Like, you can't, on the one hand, argue that it was always the case and clear, but it was also the case that it was never clear and it required development. Those two things are mutually exclusive. They can't both be true.
Yeah, exactly. And then it further talks about a council that the Orthodox did to condemn ethnophilatism, and how the ecumenical patriarch granted autocephaly to the churches of Greece, Serbia, and Romania due to the situations that occurred at the time, right? The movement in the Balkans between the the Greek people, the Serbian people, Romanian people against, the Turkish government, and so on and so forth. And it talks about the First Vatican Council. But I think particularly with this, it still makes comments about conciliarism. Though I think, Jay, you will definitely be more in line with kind of referring, like talking about what Pastor Eternus, what the First Vatican Council talked about. I just want to reiterate something I said at the beginning, which is 3.11. I want to read this. It says, Pope Leo XIII's Apostolic Letter Orientalium Dignitas in 1894 recognized the distinct rights of all the Catholic Eastern churches and showed a respectful approach to Eastern traditions. So this is where you start this kind of acceptance of Eastern traditions over time, and it's sporadically increasing. This movement is sporadically increasing. Then his encyclical letter, Praeclara Gratulationis, in 1895, invited all the Orthodox to union with the Church of Rome on the condition that they recognize the papal supremacy of jurisdiction. So here you see very clearly that at the end of the day, at the end of 19th century, all you need to do as an Orthodox Christian in order to be united with the Roman Catholic Church, turns out you can keep your faith, you can keep your doctrines, you can keep everything that you have. You just need to kiss the papal feet, right? That's basically what it's telling you, right? And it's
it's a great admission. Exactly, great admission.
Yeah, and the Orthodox basically rejected this, right? The Orthodox basically said, "This is ridiculous. We're not going to accept this."
Well,
right?
by the way, we should add that the 18 or 19 of Chieti, which we just read, says the opposite of this, right? It notes that the very criteria that Leo is asking for here is not the historic position of the church. So wait a minute. Chieti says that I have to accept something that so Chieti says it's not the historic position. Pope Leo's letter says that it is the necessary position to accept. So why am I forced to accept something that is admittedly not the traditional position of the church? You see how these contradict? Chieti 18 or 19 or whatever it is. Let me read it again because I got them both pulled up here. Chieti 19 says, quote, appeals to the Bishop of Rome from the East express communion of the church, but the Bishop of Rome did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the East. Quote unquote, that's 19 of Chieti. And what does this say right here? It says that the requirement, according to Leo XIII, was that you accept precisely that, which is admitted to be not the case. So that's called a contradiction, Roman Catholics. Contradiction.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment on this section as a whole. I think here clearly the scope is looking towards the talks of 2025. I think it's trying to prop up Constantinople quite a bit. And I think it's even
absolutely
displaying documents that we would say are in debate as having full authority. So that's funny because that would be the Roman Catholic side saying that the Orthodox actually have more councils and more authoritative documents than the Orthodox themselves admit. So considering the classic argument is to say that we don't, it's a bit contradictory. And I think it's trying to say that the primordial role of Constantinople is is really bolstered up to the point that it doesn't really mention, for example, the fact that the Jerusalem Council of Theodosius wasn't made by Constantinople. It was made against a patriarch of Constantinople, Lucaris. So I think it really skips a little bit on this part, even though it admitted it was a binding council before. So I think here's a goal would be to legitimize some more Roman powers by saying, hey, Constantinople can have that too, but in the east. So this is another part that
no, you're absolutely right. This is preparing for 2020.
Object a little bit too, because that's still something that is in discussion within the Orthodox Church, because it is true, it is factual that autocephalies were historically confirmed by Constantinople, but we can also say that many churches confirm them, and that maybe Constantinople gave the impetus, but cannot act supremely on that. And I think it goes back to Canon 34, which is this great, which is great and very balanced, which is to say that the synod cannot oppose the decision of the primate, but the primate cannot go against the decisions of the synod. So they need to act in tandem, and I think here is trying to prop Constantinople as much as possible, but it's still quite tame compared to some of the papal claims.
Real quick, let's do that. I just want everyone to see, because I know how the slow boys in the audience operate. They're not going to pay attention to what we said. They're going to blow past it and ignore it. Okay, to make this really easy for you guys, on the left of the screen, 3.11, you'll see what David was talking about, Pope Leo XIII's letter, Orientalium Dignitatis, right? Dignitas, excuse me. Recognize distinct rights of all the Catholic Eastern churches and showed a respect for their traditions. His encyclical letter, Preclara Gratulationis, invited all the Orthodox to union with the Church of Rome on the condition that they recognize the papal primacy of jurisdiction. Okay, that's the present-day Alexandria document. On the right of the screen, you'll see the Chieti document in paragraph 19 a few years ago. Both of these are similar documents. What does it say there? Appeals to disciplinary matters were made also to Constantinople and other sees. You see that? That was my point against Deborah. Such appeals to major sees were always treated in a synodical way. Appeals to the Bishop of Rome from the east expressed the communion of the church, but the Bishop of Rome did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the east. Do you see these admissions? And do you see that that's a contradiction? The document on the left is admitting that Leo XIII's attitude is that you must accept the ancient view, the traditional Vatican I view, that the Roman bishop has universal authority and canonical authority over all churches. The document on the right says in the first 1,000 years, he didn't have that authority and exercise. That's called a contradiction, Roman Catholics. Do you see that?
The classic counter-argument would be to say, oh, like he didn't have canonical jurisdiction, but he still had this charism of universal jurisdiction and being the head of the church. It's just that he didn't use it, and it wasn't recognized by the others, and it wasn't reflected in canon.
Yeah, that's called being unfalsifiable. Yeah, arguments from silence. It was there always. They never used it. It was secret, hidden powers. By the way, this is the practical system, which makes it all easy and simple, and the Pope should have just... Why didn't he just use these powers, Eric? Well, the Pope had these powers, but he just didn't use it or exercise it. By the way, I mean,
the thing is, an argument of silence supposes that there is no direct counter-argument. Like, an argument of silence would say, oh, canon law sort of left a spot for this to happen. Whereas we can see clearly the opposite being practiced and being enshrined, namely the autocephalies and all.
Exactly.
So, you're pretty much begging the question if you're saying this power exists, but it wasn't used, it wasn't demonstrated, nobody felt the need to proclaim it.
Well, I mean, again, so doesn't that make things easy and simple if this power is there to resolve the problems, but the papacy is not smart enough to use the power that it has to resolve the problems?
And by the way, the classical proof text for this would be papal, other jurisdiction appealing to the Pope, or a papal document being said and being ratified by everybody. But as the document of Chieti itself says, well, this is not something that strictly exists in the Pope, and this idea of sending documents for approval by others isn't really
Right.
the papacy in this claim. It's just manifesting is a unity.
Well,
So yeah.
remember when I brought that up to Eric Ibarra and I said, why didn't everybody just write letters to the Pope to have all the issues settled? And he said, because the Vatican would be full of paper stacks everywhere. You wouldn't have time to get through them all. Okay.
That
ahead.
was the case. You couldn't use examples, for example, of literally the papacy intervening and nobody caring in cases
Exactly.
of persecution and all that, iconoclasm, all that. Or if it was case closed because Rome took,
Yeah.
many cases would have been closed. No,
Yeah, but
the
you're
East needed to discuss.
remember they'll use the art they'll use the letter of Clement to try to act like that's how the church operated in the first century. Oh, we just asked Clement. Clement writes a letter and solves the disputes in the Church of Corinth from 800 miles away or whatever, 500 miles, whatever, however far Corinth is. But so they'll be like, oh, look, see, Pope Clement is just with a swipe of the pen resolving the issues in a church, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, again, at this point, it just means that helping, communicating, or even calling someone for help means that he has power over you. Again, that's begging the question. And on the case,
it's saying, well, but wait a minute. So if it was there that whole time, then it didn't develop as a seed form. How can Clement be exercising full universal Vatican I jurisdiction and supremacy, and yet it's something that has to develop, you see? So it can't be both of those things, is my point. It can't be always there, clear as day, existing as an exercisable power, but it's also not always there. It developed, you see.
Yeah, and to close on that, this document clearly says that it's a development.
And Satis Cognisum says it's not a development, it was always there. All right, what do you guys want to go to next?
Yeah, I mean, chapter 4 kind of just talks about it gives an overview to various different ecclesiological views across various different parties. I suppose the one thing to me, this chapter really interests me too much. I guess it talks a little bit about the Council of Sobornos, which again, it was developed by in 19th century Russia, but it kind of just goes over the history of this position. So you kind of see that this kind of understanding didn't really influence the church as a whole, but rather a specific part of the church, which I think Snek already got into the history of the Russian church and kind of how it got out of the mess that it ended up getting out of today. And other than that, I suppose one view that kind of some of these views are like the Eucharistic ecclesiology view and kind of the church's communion. I mean, these are kind of interesting views, but the way it is described here in this document is a bit too broad, which is fine because it's, the document is kind of just going over several different views. And the main part of the document that's interesting is kind of the admissions that it makes. Another thing that I want to kind of point out, actually, now that I remember, it props up Crete 2016 way too much, whereas everyone who knows a little bit about the Council of Crete knows that in fact it didn't really have a complete Catholic pan-Orthodox acceptance. Many different churches didn't show up.
Some pre-conciliar documents did, but they didn't discuss what they planned to discuss. So basically, the fourth part it's a history of ecumenism. So that's something that's still contested to an extent on both sides. Really interesting is they share, they express what theological concept were shared. And for example, in mentioning Sobornos, so the idea that everybody is involved, which is true to an extent, but I think here they're just trying to attack a little bit the traditionalist position, which is which is like only clerical, because in Rome they've really got this it's back and forth in this fight right now, and you can see that in their council, that they're really doing everything they can to promote the authority of parish council women. They're doing everything they can to promote. Basically, they have this fight, and I think it's mostly linked to the fact that historically and societally, because of mandatory celibacy, the priest wasn't often really included in the parish life. So maybe less important, but they're still saying, oh, bonus is interesting, which, yes, it's interesting, but it also has its limits. It talks about Eucharistic ecclesiology, and we would say that it's very important, because that's the earliest ecclesiology we have. That's from Cyprian of Carthage, that's from especially Ignatius of Antioch, and that's how we explain communion, because the classic Roman system would be saying that the church is submission to Rome. But here there is this idea that, the church can communicate with one another through communion.
Yeah.
And that's important, but I think that this document is propping it up to say, hey, maybe we just try to reestablish communion, to make a union before having all this
right, which is, like you said, is preparation for 2025.
Which is going in reverse,
right?
Even I think even Benedict XVI said maybe we should try to solve the problems, theological and ecclesial, before communion. Maybe
maybe right.
Communion shouldn't be done before in the hopes that it will be solved, but should be done after, when it's done, which is what the plenitude of the communion means. But these are 2 points that kind of stick out. Apart from that, it's just a history of ecumenism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how can you have reunion without the issues that separate being solved first? I mean, union presupposes truth, and it presupposes union of doctrinal matters. And, the papal system is a system that doesn't admit to much flexibility, even though these documents are being quote unquote flexible and making a lot of admissions to our position. The nature of the Vatican I papal system, which has already been set in stone, is inflexible. So it's great that they're admitting all these things, but why are they wanting us to sign on to a system which, a la Vatican I, is completely rigid and completely set in stone? And the trads, quote unquote, that are constantly harping on Vatican I, contradicting Vatican II, and so forth, are absolutely correct. There is a contradiction between what's being admitted in these documents in Vatican I, and I'm sorry, but contradictions at the papal and dogmatic level amount to this system itself being false. You understand that these are exclusive systems for Roman Catholics out there. So a lot of Roman Catholics will be like, well, look, why can't you guys we're being flexible, why can't you be flexible? Because the nature of your system is such that it is a totalizing system. You can't have Roman Catholicism being true and Vatican I being wrong. You can't have Roman Catholicism being true and Vatican II being wrong. You see, it doesn't work that way. If Vatican I or Vatican II or the papal teachings of the last 70 years are wrong, or any other papal teachings, then the papal system is wrong. It's that simple. All right, what's next? Anything?
No, I think that summarizes part 4. So yeah, like even goes further than we would in terms of the authority of the church, especially through Patriarch of Constantinople. But it also mentioned other patriarchs, such as Jerusalem. I don't know if you have anything else to say about this part, David.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say. And I think I kind of went over the conclusion to kind of give an idea about this document, but we can go over the conclusion again. And this is kind of the shifty usage of words that I see from Roman Catholic documents quite regularly, because after making all of these admissions, they just ended, well, okay, or primacy, which really is supremacy. And
yeah.
The kind of and its characterization of the Orthodox system as a federation of self-sufficient churches is not merely the adequate understanding. So it basically makes the point that, okay, we made all of these admissions, but really the Orthodox Church as it is has also these kinds of, like, lacks these certain things, whereas we Orthodox people will say, no, we don't. We have primacy, and we also have unity and distinction, so to speak, right? So we have primacy and synodality simultaneously. It's the Roman Catholics that lack synodality in the truest sense because they have supremacy, not merely just primacy. And so I see this equivocation between primacy and supremacy by Roman Catholic apologists and by the Roman Catholic Church itself. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, we actually do have an understanding of primacy that is distinct from the Roman Catholic understanding. It has its own fleshed out understanding of it. So what it's basically trying to push, and this is the official position of the Roman Catholic Church today, is that essentially they see the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church as two, lungs of the same church, right? At the end of the day, they're basically the same church that are just having a fight between each other at the end of the day. So it's a fight that somehow, for some reason, lasts for 1,000 years. And if they fix all of these minor different issues, they might just come back again in union and just become one church in a complete sense. Until then, the two churches are just one church that are just separate from each other in some sense, right? And in Roman Catholic ecclesiology in the modern day, as promulgated by even various different so-called traditional Roman Catholic apologists, is that the Orthodox Church pretty much has everything. The Orthodox Church has Christ, but as Father Peter Heers kind of has a title to one of his videos, if we have Christ, why do we need the Pope, right? And at the end of the day, the Roman Catholic system is one of papal, recognizing the Pope as the leader of Christianity. And once you do that, you can just believe in anything that you want, which is why you have all of these Eastern Catholics who believe in Orthodox doctrines, Nestorian doctrines, Monophysite doctrines, and these can somehow be part of the Roman Catholic Church because the theology doesn't actually matter. Turns out the only thing that matters is if you kiss the papal feet, and that's just it. And this document, in spite of all of the admissions that it makes, it's still at the end of the day showcases the intention of having power and increasing its own authority of the Roman Catholic Church at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, the document admits that it says synodality and primacy need to be seen as, quote, interrelated, complementary, inseparable realities, and it's quoting the Chieti document. Now, wait a minute. How many ecclesiologies are there? Does the church have rival ecclesiologies existing within it? No. There's one ecclesiology, and if it's the ecclesiology handed down in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, that's good enough. Why do we need competing ecclesiologies within the church, right? So in other words, this is, again, admitting that, look, okay, we concede all the points that you guys have been saying, but let's still have the papacy because, look, both of these systems can cohere. Both of them kind of need each other, complementary. No, they're not. Vatican I does not have a complementary ecclesiology. And by complementary, I don't mean does Vatican I ever admit that there are other bishops in the church and that they have authority in their diocese. I know it says that. That's not the point. Because the point is universal supremacy without reference to any other bishops is precisely a non-patristic ecclesiology. It's a non-first millennium ecclesiology. So these are two different systems, that's why there's two different churches, Rome and Orthodoxy. So the idea that they're interrelated and complementary is just like David said, and like Snek said, really just preparing the way for 2025. And, oh, look, see, we can all work together and come up with some new tertium quid church, which has all of this smushed together.
Yeah, I mean, canon. That's why I insisted on canon 34 of the Apostles, is that we already have this. We already have an understanding of primacy that is not conflicting with our understanding of synodality. And I think that the point here is to say, hey, you're stressing synodality. We've been stressing primacy. Let's mix. Let's do a little bit of both. No. The Orthodox position would be that we have both. We have, and that's why we have been able